If I were to name two concepts that Friendship is Magic seems to care about more than any others, they would be love and harmony. Love being that pink, fluffy, gooey stuff that allows you to overcome any adversity with its sheer might. And harmony being the glue that keeps friends stuck together as they power through. Friendship is Magic is here to tell you that both of those concepts are great things, and today I really want to talk to you about love in particular. How it's portrayed in Friendship is Magic, what Friendship is Magic thinks healthy and beautiful relationships look like, and why I love love so much, as portrayed by Friendship is Magic. There is a lot of ground to cover, so I say we not waste any more time, and just get into the good stuff right away. One of the most flamboyant and only displays of romantic love comes from the finale of Season 2, wherein Twilight hears that her brother is going to be married, much to her surprise and skepticism. Twilight's brother Shining Armor is marrying Twilight's old foal-sitter, Cadance, and at first this seems to soothe Twilight. But then Twilight realizes that Cadance isn't quite as she remembers her. Cadance is acting downright nasty to Twilight and her friends. When Twilight decides to spy on Cadance and sees that Cadance is using magic on Shining Armor, Twilight freaks out and confronts Cadance about it. Confronts Cadance rather angrily at that. This turns out to be a bad idea. Shining Armor attests that, in fact, Cadance wasn't doing anything weird. Cadance was just helping Shining Armor with his headaches. And the reason she was acting so nasty is just because she's stressed. It is a wedding after all. And if this were any other episode of Friendship is Magic up until this point, this would be where Twilight learns her lesson. The lesson would be that, of course, people's behaviors change with their emotional states. Nobody is perfect, nobody can be the pretty pink princess that does everything right all of the time. We all have our flaws. Assuming the worst of somebody when there could be a reasonable explanation is a bad idea. But that's not what this episode is interested in. One of my biggest hangups with this episode is its concept, because in fact, Cadance wasn't Cadance. There is no moral about how stress changes people's behavior. Instead, it just turns out that a wicked villain had assumed Cadance's identity, and that's why everything was so weird, which raises a lot of questions and brings us an incredibly awful moral. At the end of the episode, Princess Celestia tells Twilight that she did the right thing, that she trusted her gut, and it turned out she was right. Cadance was acting weird, and it was because Cadance wasn't Cadance and was instead a bug monster. But that's stupid, and what Twilight did is still wrong and unreasonable. It doesn't really matter that the real Cadance was trapped in a dungeon, and that the nasty Cadance turned out to be an imposter bug monster. Twilight's behavior was still unreasonable. It is not reasonable to assume that someone was impersonating Cadance just because she was acting nasty. It is far more reasonable to assume that Cadance was just stressed, regardless of whether that's true. Your hunch being right does not vindicate the actions you took in support of that hunch, and this moral sucks. Furthermore, allow me to ask you, personally, a question. If your job was to impersonate someone so that nobody would notice that you weren't the real them, would you do your best to act as they would? Or would you instead act like a nasty monster? Apparently, Queen Chrysalis, the villain who's impersonating Cadance, decided that the answer is to be a nasty monster. It is a dumb decision that increases the likelihood of things going wrong, but she makes a lot of those, and later episodes in the series would have you believe it's just because she's dumb and incompetent, in spite of her capacity for villainy. But then again, that's not really the point of Chrysalis, I suppose. She's not there to be smart, she's not there to be sympathetic, she's not there to support quaint morals. She's there to be the antithesis of what the show considers to be love. She is an over-the-top Disney villain with her own villainous musical number who exists to oppose true consensual love in just about every respect. She is controlling, stating rather explicitly that she wishes to control every creature. But real love is free and generous. She is lustful, stating that she wishes to have Shining Armor just to have him, but real love is romantic and caring. She is manipulative, lying about her intentions and having to wear a mask to get what she desires. But real love is both honest and understanding. They also throw in some sadism, showing Chrysalis explicitly delighting in the pain she brings others, and she gets to be in charge of an evil army called the Changelings, who are homogeneous, black, bug-like, and have no noticeable identity of their own aside from a couple gags. And perhaps the most critical point of it all is that both her and her Changeling army take love by force, using magic, cornering ponies, and stealing their affection from them. Chrysalis really does get to have it all, even stealing consent itself as a concept from the idea of love. But a villain so nasty, so opposed to what is right and true and good about love, would be nothing if you didn't show how powerful love truly was, and why true love actually mattered. And the show does that, that's for sure. There are two precious moments to me in the finale that show what true love and true devotion looks like, what it means to be the opposite of Chrysalis. One of them comes after Twilight finds the real Cadance trapped in a dungeon. Cadance has been battered, trapped there for who knows how long, but still, all she can think about is her husband-to-be. Even after all she's been through, Cadance rushes past Twilight trying to escape the dungeon, trying to push a minecart she knows she doesn't have the strength to move, breaking down in tears because this is an obstacle between her and Shining Armor and she needs it to move. Why won't it move? And we can see surprise turn to happiness and realization in Twilight's eyes as she sees for the first time exactly how much her brother means to Cadance. Exactly what love feels like. Yeah, so I cried a bit during this part, what of it? The second precious moment is when the real Cadance reunites with Shining Armor, seeing him stripped of all his life, vigor, and identity, and is just broken up about it. She uses the magic of her love, true, consensual, caring love, to revitalize him, because that's what real love does. It doesn't bind us or strip us of who we are, it empowers us, frees us. Yeah, so I cried a bit during this part, what up? And then they blast Chrysalis away with a giant explosion of love, fueled by Cadance's love magic and Shining Armor's barrier magic, intertwined in perfect harmony. And then Shining Armor and Cadance get to have their big, beautiful wedding, played over a pop song called Love is in Bloom, about how great love is and about how it recontextualizes life for the better, and it's just, you know, the sappy romance love stuff that I love. With Chrysalis flung to the far corners of the country, and this finale gaining the notable accolade of making me cry twice, you might think things are done here. But there's actually a lot more about love that Friendship is Magic has to say, and quite a bit of it concerns the Changelings and Queen Chrysalis. So let's next look into the far-reaching consequences of this beautiful wedding. The next episode we'll be talking about, titled The Times They Are a Changeling, takes place in the Crystal Empire, which it is worth noting is an empire made out of love and light, brought to life by a baby's birth, specifically the baby of Shining Armor and Cadance. A lot has changed in the years since the wedding. For example, Spike, Twilight's assistant, is now a national hero in the Crystal Empire, for reasons I don't want to talk about. Cadance, the Princess of True Love, now rules over the Crystal Empire with her husband Shining Armor, for reasons I don't want to talk about. But most importantly, for the first time since the wedding, a changeling has been sighted, and it's been sighted near Crystal Empire borders. It's worth noting that the lone changeling, which usually come in hives, has not been doing anything, but everybody assumes the worst anyway. I mean, wouldn't you, after the wedding? It's one of the few times where, oh god, what if they're after the baby, is a perfectly reasonable sentiment, because Flurryheart, Cadance and Shining Armor's daughter, had a spectacular birth which brought love to the kingdom, and changelings feed on love. Eventually, when every pony goes looking for the changeling and Spike finds it, he finds out that the changeling just, isn't all that evil, honestly. The lone changeling, unfortunately named Thorax, is actually quite timid, submissive, kind, and generous, everything that Chrysalis wasn't in a changeling. Thorax gives somewhat conflicting reason as to why he's not like other changelings. It seems at first like he's saying he was just born different, but then later he says he saw what happened at the wedding and decided that he couldn't in good conscience take true love like that. I'm not sure which it's meant to be, but presumably the latter, given the context of the episode and its title. So we'll work on the assumption that he chose to be a better changeling, since that's more supported by the rest of the narrative. Thorax's dream, it turns out, is to share true consensual love, of the friendship variety, not just the romantic variety, with other ponies. Spike thinks that he can talk to the ponies of the Crystal Empire, given his celebrity status, and convince them to allow a changeling into the kingdom. This setup could have led to a really interesting episode about a lot of moral questions and the capacity to use social power for good, but unfortunately the episode almost entirely lacks any nuance. None of the characters act like characters, they all act like cardboard cutout caricatures and only behave in ways that service the plot. No pony has any complex opinion on changelings, and nobody wants to hear Spike out. When Spike tries to tell the guards that he's befriended a changeling, the guards laugh in his face, not because of any complex character motivation or anything that could be tied to an actual reason, emotional or otherwise, but just because that's the easiest way to get Spike to give up. If you just make everyone laugh in Spike's face when he presents his idea, then you don't have to write anything. You don't really have to try. They laughed at Spike because he tried doing the thing, so now he's done trying to do the thing. And the whole episode is full of lazy cop-outs like this. Why does Spike trust Thorax so immediately after meeting him? Why, it's because Thorax saved his life. That's convenient. Why does Spike give up trying to do the right thing? It's because everybody cartoonishly starts laughing in his face when he brings it up and they think it's a joke. Isn't that convenient? Why does Spike have his falling out with Thorax at the end of the second act? Why, it's because he was unable to stand up for Thorax when it mattered wait, no, actually that one's pretty good and has some room for emotional depth. Unfortunately, after you come back from commercial break, it turns out the emotional depth was never there. After Spike fails to stand up for Thorax, he immediately realizes that what he did was wrong and goes to look for Thorax without any need to grow or develop his character or introspect. Nobody in this episode is capable of a critical thought. Then Spike returns with Thorax to the Crystal Empire, and he tries doing the right thing again by talking to them about how Thorax is different, but this time through song. And this is the worst thing he could have done. If you're going to go get the changeling and bring it back to the Crystal Empire, you should tell the people who are your friends and you need to convince first, and then go get Thorax and bring him back. Bringing Thorax back should not be some kind of surprise dramatic event. Spike is being a rather terrible friend. And the song itself, while visually lovely, does not really offer anything of substance. The metaphors are ineffective. Spike spends a large portion of the song wallowing in self-pity about how he thinks he's a bad person for abandoning Thorax when Thorax needed him, and yet the song manages to convince everyone anyway. It turns out all you need to do to convince everyone you're not evil is trick a single dragon into singing a song for you, and then all of his friends will believe that you're not evil, and they will let you touch their baby, which is made of love, and you eat love. Nobody in this episode is capable of exhibiting anything resembling real thought or doubt, and it's kind of weird in an episode where thought and doubt are this important. The episode does try to do a couple of important things involving using social power for good, and showing you how a good person is good regardless of how they're treated. It's not great. But the episode is still important because it establishes the existence of Thorax, an effeminate, submissive changeling who believes in consensual love, the power of consensual love, and wants to share in that love with others, and most importantly, give it to others. Thorax's existence, character traits, and beliefs are all critical in what happens next. In the Season 6 finale, To Where and Back Again, Thorax is on a journey with several others to confront Queen Chrysalis at the Changeling Hive for complicated reasons. On the way, Starlight Glimmer, a pony who we're not going to get into because she's super complicated, talks with Thorax about Thorax's change in wings. Thorax's wings are now shimmering, pretty, diaphanous even. They're emanating an ephemeral, friendly glow similar to that of the crystal ponies and similar in color to traditional ponies. It's revealed this physical change started when Thorax began sharing love instead of taking it. Consensual love, after all, and sharing it is what makes people people and not monsters. This physical change is completed when Queen Chrysalis tries to steal Thorax's love, and rather than hiding it from her, he gives it freely. The ability for Thorax to freely give consensual love is all the world of difference between him and Chrysalis. The other changelings, seeing Thorax's transformation, knowing that there's now a better way, decide to give love freely themselves, and in doing so, they blow the roof off of the old hive, allowing light and color to flow within. Practically all of the setup for this confrontation was done in previous episodes. A Canterlot wedding established who Chrysalis is, why she's evil, the kind of love she proposes to have, and what the changelings are. And whether anybody knew it or not, Thorax was established as the ideal new leader of the changelings in the times they are a changeling. There's a lot of talk in To Where and Back Again about what makes a good leader. A good leader protects, they listen, and they look for better ways, healthier ways, for their people to thrive and be free. Chrysalis does none of these things, and worst of all, she stifles individuality, preventing people from ever trying to accomplish the things she cannot. And Thorax is the changing of the guard, championing individuality, progressivism, and emotional vulnerability. The next generation is always going to look a bit odd. They may seem flamboyant to you, they may uproot all of that you know. The change they bring may be frightening, and may illuminate flaws in yourself, but they also illuminate the path to the future, and are far more humane, caring, and capable. And the job of the old guard is to protect, listen, and consider. And if they fail to listen, maybe they deserve to be afraid. But now that we know that Thorax is the future, I think it's only fair that we see what his future looks like. It is now Season 7, the episode title is Triple Threat, and Thorax is visiting Ponyville because he's the new changeling leader of the new changeling kingdom, and he's unsure about his responsibilities and wants to ask Spike for advice. Spike has given some pretty decent advice throughout the show, and they are friends, so this seems fair. The only problem being that Spike accidentally invited Dragon Lord Ember on the same day, and Ember and Thorax are pretty opposite in terms of personality. While Thorax is gentle and emotionally open, Ember is aggressive and emotionally hardened. And it turns out that Thorax's gentle, submissive nature is part of his problems. While most changelings wanted to change after Thorax demonstrated there was a better way, there are some that just didn't want to, traditionalists, if you will. It's complicated. You have to be emotionally open and vulnerable, but that's different from being a doormat. There's a fine line between individualism and sadism, and Thorax has to learn where to enforce that line where his subjects are concerned. When Ember and Thorax eventually do meet, in spite of Spike trying to keep them apart, they get the answers they need from each other. Thorax learns from Ember that sometimes you just have to stand up, say wrong is wrong, say your rule is your rule, and that's that. There are few times where this level of absolute assertiveness is acceptable for an authority figure, but I would argue that someone trying to take love without consent is definitely one of the times where it's necessary. They have to stop doing that, whether they like it or not. And Thorax is going to be the one who makes them, whether he likes it or not. And the lesson Ember has to learn from Thorax is that sometimes you have to be emotionally vulnerable to get through your problems. This is something Thorax has been good at since his introduction, seemingly doing it without much effort or thought, but for Ember, and a lot of people like Ember, it's pretty rough. Ember is used to solving problems with competition, but that's not how you actually fix things. In order to actually fix an emotional problem, you have to make your emotions clear. Having learned their lessons, Thorax and Ember both confront Spike, and complain to him that, well, he kept them apart when they could have just been friends from the beginning. And now Thorax has his assertiveness, which is a leadership quality that is very precious to have and very precarious to use, so he can deal with the renegade changelings, or at least most of them. 2 episodes later, we're introduced to Phalanx in the episode To Change a Changeling, and Phalanx is the only traditionalist who hasn't changed. This is because Thorax has a particularly hard time forcing him to change given their close relationship. Phalanx often protected Thorax when they were younger. The episode does a pretty good job explaining why a changeling might want to avoid changing for non-sadistic reasons. Phalanx doesn't want to change, but it's not just because he's a monster, it's because the way the old things were has value to him. He values traditions not just for the sake of them being traditions, but because he thinks it's the easiest way to protect the Hive and the changelings from predators. He criticizes the new changeling's emotional vulnerability because he sees it as an inherently bad thing to be vulnerable. He criticizes the decorations around the Hive because they serve no practical utility, and he thinks enemies may be able to hide inside of them. He refuses to let go of a different time, and all of his reasons, every criticism he has, is fueled by worry. Not worry for himself or what will become of him, but worry for his kin. The episode ends with a conflict that forces Pharynx to enact violence as a means of defense. There is a terrible creature after the Changeling Hive. Pharynx must do combat with it, and the other changelings support him in this because it is necessary. This demonstrates to the other changelings that Pharynx doesn't hate them or who they are, he simply wants to protect them. And it demonstrates to Pharynx that his protectiveness is never what caused him to get in conflict with the other changelings, it was simply the way he expressed his protectiveness. It's an episode, in short, about Pharynx learning how to protect people without suffocating their individuality or self-expression. When Pharynx sees that giving love freely and protecting the Hive don't have to conflict with one another, he too finally gets to transform. Love is for everyone, and the changing of the guard doesn't mean we simply leave the old guard behind to rot, but rather that we have to acknowledge the old equilibrium and help transfer it to a new one. Pharynx had to adjust with the times. He too had to change, but he didn't have to leave what made him valuable behind. Aside from the core conflict, the episode does give us a few other things. We get a look at the new Changeling Kingdom and its new aesthetic, and we get to see what its inhabitants are like, but sadly, this episode is practically the last one where we hear about the Changelings in a meaningful context as a culture. This is partly because after Season 7, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic shifted away from general stories about harmony and love and more towards stories about cultural acceptance and cultural diversity. This meant showing less of creatures in their own habitats and showing more creatures interacting together in one habitat. In Season 8, this was more or less accomplished by giving each race a representative, and the representative of the Changeling race was a child named Ocellus. Ocellus never talked much about other changelings or changeling culture in her episodes or appearances, but she did at least give us something. It's shown through one of her flashbacks that it seems that changeling culture had adopted a more traditional family style. Originally, it was the case that Chrysalis birthed everyone and was the lord of everyone, but now it seems that families are more what we're used to. In that case, things have come full circle in the most romantic way they possibly could. Changelings once existed just to crash weddings and steal consensual love. Now they can make that consensual love and have weddings for themselves, and understand all the beauty that entails. Love, according to My Little Pony, is beautiful. Love listens, love understands, love changes, love frees, and love protects. I love My Little Pony's love. It's the kind of love I want to express, want to support, and hope we can all carry with us into life and into the future.